The OldPreMeds podcast, session number 205. You're a non-traditional student entering the medical field on your terms. You may have had some hiccups along the way, but now you're ready to change course and go back and serve others as a physician. This podcast is here to help answer your questions and help educate you on your non-traditional journey to becoming a physician. Welcome to the OldPreMeds podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining me today. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, and I answer your non-traditional pre-med questions at premedforums.com. Just click on the non-traditional pre-med form, ask your question, and hopefully it'll get answered here on the podcast. Today we have a great question, and it actually is funny because it kind of coincides with the episode that's also releasing today on the pre-med years, where I had an amazing conversation with Dr. Natalie Crawford, all about being a woman in medicine and that path for being a woman, being a mom in this journey. And so I want you to go listen to that episode as well, but we'll tackle this question here. Our poster asked, did any of you mention your children in your application, especially if it adds to your narrative of why you wanted to become a doctor? So the question really surrounds around, should you mention your children in your application? Now, obviously, a lot of you are going to think that this is a potential red flag, right? If an admissions committee sees, oh, this student, let's just assume it's female, this student is applying to medical school, they have a kid, oh my gosh, they're going to be out all the time. The kid's going to get sick. They're not going to be able to make it to class. They're going to miss rotations. They're going to whatever, right? That's the fear that you have about mentioning kids in an application. Now, the question is that fear founded, or is it just make-believe? Now, obviously, humans are humans, and humans are reading applications, and humans have judgments and biases and all of that stuff. And so you may come across, when you are applying to medical school, you may come across a reviewer reviewing your application at a school, and they may not like what they see because you mention having kids. So that definitely could be a potential consideration. With that said, though, especially the way that this question was worded, especially if it adds to your narrative of why you wanted to become a doctor, I don't think there's any reason not to put it in because of that. Now, we've talked a lot about, whether it was in this podcast or the pre-med years, about mentioning kind of red flags in an application or things that you may mention that could be construed as red flags. And we talk a lot about mental health and whether or not you should talk about that in an application. And I always come back to, if your mental health challenge or whatever you're working with has kind of been the foundation of why you want to be a physician, whether seeing your parents go through it, your mom, your dad, yourself going through it, and the care that you received and everything else, if that's why you want to be a physician, then obviously that has to be in your application, because the personal statement is all about why you want to be a physician. And so if you are a parent and why you want to be a physician includes being a parent and maybe the care that your kid received, or maybe that you received while you were giving birth, or whatever happened around that, then it needs to go in your application because it's part of your story. You can't avoid pieces of your story about why you want to be a physician, including your parents being physicians or close family members or whatever. You can't avoid talking about that stuff because then your story doesn't really make sense. And I've read applications before. I've read personal statements where I'm like, this is okay, but it seems to be missing something. There's something that's just not connecting the dots right. And I'll talk to the student more and ask some more questions, and come to find out, oh, their parent is a physician. And one specifically that I'm thinking about, right? Mom is a doctor, dad's a PA. I'm like, why didn't you mention this in your personal statement? And she said, oh, I didn't think it was relevant, or, oh, I didn't want them to think that I'm doing this just because my mom's a doctor. I'm like, yes, but your story doesn't make sense without it because you're trying to connect all of these dots without one huge dot in there, right? You don't have that starting point about being exposed to medicine from an early age because your parents are in healthcare. And so if you are trying to tell your story, avoiding certain parts of your story that are integral to your story, especially around why you want to be a doctor, then you're not doing it right. And you're going to have to understand that, yes, there may be consequences around that. But let me ask you a question. If you apply to a medical school and hide the fact that you have kids, you get in, and then the school is not flexible with the fact that you do have a kid, and you are penalized because you have a kid, and you may have to miss a class or miss a small group or stay home on a rotation, and you get dinged in some way because of that. Is that really a school you want to be at? Probably not. Or would you prefer to lay all your cards out on the table? And this goes for anything in an application that maybe you're like, I don't know if I should put that in there. You potentially can lay all those cards out and go, you know what? Here's who I am. Take it or leave it. And then you know that the schools that are interviewing you and the schools that accept you know your story, know that you have a kid, know that you're struggling with depression, bipolar, whatever that may be. Know that you have dyslexia, know that you have ADHD, whatever those struggles may be for you. Lay all those cards out and let the school decide. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But that's kind of the decision algorithm for you to determine whether or not you talk about something in your application. I hope that was helpful for you. Again, if you have a question you want answered here on the Old Pre-Meds podcast, go to premedforums.com, click on the non-traditional pre-med forum, and ask your question. Hope you have a great week. See you next time here on the Old Pre-Meds podcast.
This is MedEd Media.